Sean, thank you for your service to our country. And thank you for coming today as our special guest on Constituting America's Constitutional Chats. We're going to ask you to say a few words about our topic today, which is what day one of a new White House looks like, and then we'll go to questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kathy, and Janine, and Elizabeth Pinkerton, who does so much great work behind the scenes. And I love what you guys do and how committed you are to helping the next generation of Americans get involved and create a better understanding of our government, what we do and why we do it. I'll jump right in. A very timely discussion that we're having, obviously, because I think that there's a big difference between the White House that I walked into 8 years ago and the White House that the staff walked into yesterday. So and again, I'll give you guys as much top line, and then when we get to questions, drill down on anything I missed or any other topic for that matter. So the way it works is that when one administration passes to another, I think it's been 30 years or so since we've firmed up the transition rules, but there's actually an official transition that occurs. There are documents that get signed. They have what they call landing teams, where people are named to, whether it's the White House, the Department of Defense, random agencies, and they start to come in from the incoming administration to get a handle on stuff, everything from logistics to issues that are happening to personnel, like how many people work here and what do the career staff do? Because there's a lot of career staff that works throughout government that doesn't come in or out with the new party. So I say that because I was named White House Press Secretary on December 21st of 2016. And then in early January, I was named to the landing team right afterwards for the White House. And then I started communication with the current folks that were there. They were President Obama's team. So Josh Ernst was President Obama's last press secretary, and Jen Psaki was the communications director. And as Kathy mentioned, I was White House press secretary and acting communications director at the same time. Pro tip, I don't recommend that ever again for anyone. Not a smart thing to do too much for one person. And they're very different jobs. Again, if you want to ask about that later, we can. In any case, so I met with them. I went over to the White House, tried to get a little bit of the lay of the land. Which frankly, it doesn't matter how many times you go until you are actually in the office. You don't fully appreciate a lot of the speed, the logistics, or whatever. It's like, going to a restaurant versus working in a restaurant. You can visit it, but until you go behind the scenes and see how the kitchen operates in the front of house, it's a very different experience, kind of going over and getting the tour. So I had done everything from practice briefings, mock briefings, to real ones. I mean, I did an on-camera briefing during the transition. Had really tried to get, and I talked to most of my predecessors on a bipartisan basis. Robert Gibbs, who had served as President Obama's first, Ari Fleischer, Dana Perino, Mike McCurry, who served with Bill Clinton. Super helpful group of folks. And then, day one, you literally, I had pictures. You guys remind me, I'll do it today. I'll post them all on my Instagram account. Some of the things we walked in, and literally we went to the inauguration. President gets sworn in. There's a bunch of stuff that happens behind the scenes. I joke that he does have a job, right? Just like any other company, he gets onboarded. Like, he has to sign a bunch of paperwork being like, you're now a government employee. And then there's a lunch. And so we went to the lunch, and then the president did a bunch of other pomp and circumstance kind of things, as he did yesterday. And we gathered, many of us, in a van, get ushered down to the White House. And we walked into the Roosevelt room, which is, you see that a lot of times on television. There's two big rooms right in the West Wing. There's the cabinet room, which the cabinet meets in from time to time. The president does use it for other meetings. And then the Roosevelt room, which he holds a lot of events in. President Biden held a lot of press. Well, he didn't hold a lot of press events at all, but he did a lot of, that was a backdrop for him, many cases. Anyway, we walk in, and literally on the table is like your name and a sticky and a bunch of stuff. Everything from your badge to your iPhone to, I'm trying to remember, binders of information and directories. Gather all that. The press secretary's office is actually pretty amazing. It's big, which most offices in the West Wing are not. It's got its own fireplace, a lot of places for people to sit. But you walk in there and there's like 2 couches, a table. There had been some discussion during the transition. You actually meet with those career staffers that I mentioned, and they, what desk would you like? What, do you want? But to be honest with you, and I'll put this photo on Instagram later today, you'll see this is not like when I walked in, it was sort of I hate to use the word dingy because it's somewhat disrespectful to the office, but it was dingy. I mean, the furniture was beat up. Subsequently, right as I left, by the way, perfect timing, we did a complete overhaul of the West Wing and put new carpet in. All the desks were refinished. The drapes and the what do they call those treatments? It looks beautiful now. So I just had bad timing. But they help you with all that stuff. Like, where do you want your printer? And we dealt with classified information. So, you have a little safe, all that kind of stuff. And then logistically, the way the press secretary's office is set up is it's referred to as lower press, which is a small little set of offices right off the press briefing room. You always see a door that goes between the briefing room and you probably don't know where anyone goes, but that's a little office. It's called lower press. And then right up another level is the press secretary's office right across from the Oval Office. And so the day one, you're literally trying to figure out, how do I send stuff? How do I get the Twitter account running? How do I get my email up and running? It's all there, but somebody literally comes in and starts going, okay, this is how you do this. Here's how this works. I mean, there's all sorts of nuances that go with the job. This time, and I'll just end it by saying this time, Caroline Leavitt, who is the press secretary for this incoming administration, she had worked for President Trump at the end of his last term. So she knows the office, she knows the lay of the land, she knows all the things that I didn't. And that's super helpful. So I think the one big advantage that President Trump individually and some of these guys have is that day one to them is sort of like coming back home. Caroline worked in the press office. She knows the logistics, how to get things done, who to go to, all of those small things that just take a while to get up and running. And we had spent a lot of time because remember, you've got not just the press office, you've got the photographer, the photography office, because you're going to want to get a lot of those shots out with the president. You've got to make sure that the digital team can upload everything that you say is happening up to the website. There's all these moving parts that are happening, and you're trying to figure out, who do I touch? Even when I had my first press conference, I took questions from Skype. You think about that. Somebody's got to figure out how that happens. The White House Communications Agency. We had to get them in and say, this is what I want to do. Can you make it happen? The entire press staff, and I'll end with this, is 12 people, including the press secretary. As I said, I was communications director. That's probably another 25. But it's not a big team considering the responsibility and the level of information that comes in and out of that office. With that, I'll go back to you and let's hear what you have to say.
Well, that's fascinating. And, I've been involved in politics for 40 years now, actually, and my husband worked in the White House. I know you and Ed worked together for a while, and I I'm learning things today that I never knew. And it's really interesting to hear about your experiences and what it's like to walk in on the first day. And I know we have a lot of questions, so Janine, I'm
Yep,
going to turn it over to
fire
you.
away.
Okay, Sean Spicer, Janine Turner, thank you so much. This is like a fascinating, book, novel, the page turner, listening to your stories. And that first image that comes to my mind is spinning a bunch of plates. I can't even imagine trying to hold down the fort and manage the wild west of the press and the obligation of it nationally and internationally, and at the same time trying to figure out your Twitter account. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't even, just figuring out the Twitter account could take, oh my gosh, that's really interesting. And, I think about that when we all watched yesterday, Biden and Jill Biden, and we asked President Biden, we watched them leave. And then we watched Melania and First Lady Melania and President Trump walk in. And I'm thinking, do they have their, are there clothes there yet?
Yeah, so it's actually, that's a whole nother, discussion. But yes, I mean, The moving trucks, it's a fascinating day because there's literally two sets of trucks. The Biden stuff is going out one side and the Trump stuff is coming in the other. And those guys who do that, it's unbelievable what happens during, you know how when President Biden and President Trump left the White House yesterday, it's like going into overdrive. Those folks literally are bringing in. It's like Janine. I don't know. Like it's like a play when they change sets or something. I don't even. I'm trying to think of a good analogy, but it's unreal what actually happens in the matter of a few hours. That you look when President Trump sat yesterday in the Oval Office, and all of the new paintings were there that he wanted. The busts of, I think he has a bust of George Washington in there. The rug, the desk stayed the same. The chair, all that stuff happened in a matter of hours. President Biden met with President Trump yesterday morning in the White House, and it was all his stuff. And then by like 3 o'clock, it's all President Trump's stuff. It's a just unbelievable logistical hurdle that gets overcome.
Uh-huh. The peaceful transfer of power, I'm sure, has a lot of drama behind the scenes.
Logistics, anyway.
Logistics, yes, that's really, really, really intriguing. Well, okay, I just had to ask that question, and I want to ask you a real specific question about your duties. But before I'll get to that, I remember watching. I understand Caroline Leavitt's not doing a press conference today because I guess President Trump's doing his own. But I remember your first press conference. Oh my God! And you had the most hostile press ever. Like ever. And I mean, that was was your first press conference the first day or the second day? And I just remember the hostility that you had to, with which you had to contend was astonishing.
Yeah, I mean, so I did two. There's one where we, didn't take questions right off the first day, and then the second one that was sort of where that we went in depth, was probably an hour and a half long. I mean, you really don't appreciate, like I said, I had done a bunch of mock interview or mock sessions with my team. I had done some during the transition, but nothing gets you prepared for sitting in that room and just having people kind of come after you like they're all jacked up trying to attack you. I mean, it really was a daunting experience that I had never, I just don't know that you could ever prepare appropriately for that.
No, I'm sure not. Okay, so let's talk about some logistics. I want to ask the difference between the communications director and the press secretary, and I also want to ask what the press secretary actually does. Because in all the prep that you must have to do you meet with the president and like at the top of the morning and say, what do you want me to say to the press today? How do you learn what his or her someday, what the stances are? I mean, how do you prepare have you already met with the president? You meet with him every day and say, this is what I want you to go out and say?
So I'll take it in order. The difference between the communications and the press office is pretty simple. The press office is in the moment. So when reporters call and ask a question, what are we doing today? What's being announced, or what are we announcing? The present time stuff, if you will, is what the press office deals with. The communications office is thinking tomorrow, next month, 2 months from now. They are the big picture folks. They're thinking, hey, the president's traveling to, Vegas in a month to make this announcement on clean energy. And we're going to have these people there. We're going to set up something here and we're going to make it look, I mean, they're thinking down the road. They're thinking big picture. Holistically, they're coordinating with other departments and agencies. So the president wants to roll out a manufacturing proposal of some sort. They might sit down with the Commerce Department, maybe even Treasury or something, and coordinate. Okay, well, we should have it at this place. We want it to look like this. We're going to have these guests come. We're going to have these additional speakers. But they're thinking long term. They're doing all the coordination. The press secretary is literally taking the incoming press calls today. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not setting up stuff tomorrow, right? So let's say the CNN calls and says, I want to do an interview next Friday. Like, that's still in the press office. But the point is that it's actual media inquiries right there then. The communications office generally isn't sort of where the day-to-day media interaction goes. It's thinking big picture. What are we doing tomorrow? What are we doing later? As far as the role goes. It varies from um, press secretary and president. So when I was meeting with Josh Ernst and some of the other people that I had talked to about their interactions, depending on the president, like Obama used to schedule some time here and there and talk to Josh. I honestly don't think that either Jen Psaki and definitely not Corinne Jean-Pierre met at all with Biden. It was evident in how they acted. It all ran through the chief of staff's office. With me, I probably met with President Trump a minimum of probably close to 10 times a day in some form. I either talked to him or what was in the Oval Office. And that relationship evolved over time where I would learn that there are certain issues and certain things that he really cares about. And so, look, if you pick a day like today, I can probably guess 70 to 80% of the questions that are going to get asked, because you look at what's being talked about on cable, you read Twitter, you look at the headlines and major stories dominating newspapers, the editorials, and you can say, okay, I think this is going to happen. Plus, you start to get inquiries right off the bat. You get the job of the press secretary. A, they've got a staff that they're managing. B, they're in countless meetings because there's immediate impact to policy decisions, to personnel decisions that you have to be able to weigh in on. Sometimes it's, hey guys, if we do that, we're going to get crushed in the media. Or, hey, if we're going to do that, let's make sure we loop in the communications team and create a rollout plan, because that's a really good idea. I think it'll go over favorably. So you're in countless meetings. And then you are dealing a lot with the day-to-day, minute-by-minute incoming questions of the press corps. So everything from the mundane stuff to setting up interviews to whatever. So you're getting a really good feel in real time, all the time, about what's on their mind, because they tend to like move and act like a pack. Um, so um, so I would go to President Trump and say, hey, I've gotten like 15 questions on this border security proposal that we've announced. Sometimes I would draft a thing and say, I think the best thing is to say blah, 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 blah. And he would say, totally agree. Or he'd say, add these 5 words or whatever, but he'd weigh in some fashion. There are some issues that I knew he cared about, more than others. And I'd say, hey, I know, how do you want me to phrase exactly how you feel in this? Or I know I'm going to get asked about X. How do you want it communicated? And so that grew over time as I learned a little bit more about, what he really cared about, or what I knew that he would want nuanced real specifically. So there's certain issues that I'd say, okay, I know that he's going to want to say exactly how, and I would literally write down what he wanted. He'd say, okay, I want to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, go say that. And then but it was much better, because the job of the press secretary that I think a lot of folks in the media, especially in the first term, didn't really understand is that, like, my views are irrelevant. I'm there to serve as his spokesperson in lieu of him. If he can speak for, the president's just so busy every day. There's only so much time in a day. So that's the job of the press secretary, is to channel his thoughts and his views to the public via the media when he can't. And so I would get as much of a sense exactly how he wanted it phrased.
Wow. Really, 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 really interesting. I could ask 1,000,000,000 questions, but I have to share and toss. But I will ask one last question. Thank you for this behind the scenes. And for all that you did, and for your service to our country, both in the military and as service to your country in every forum and genre with which you serve. And I just appreciate you very, very much.
Very welcome.
Genuinely. When you're in the room, do you have a chart of all the people that are sitting there? And then how do you choose to pick on the person? Like, how do you choose?
Oh, that's a great question, Janine. Yeah. And by the way, I'm going to say something, and there's 2 things that I'll say just as a shout out. Number one, the first book I wrote, called The Briefing, has a lot of the stuff that we're talking about in it. It's like, I say this because I will never make a penny anymore off the thing. And if you go on Amazon, you'll see that they're like $5. But if you love this kind of conversation, that was my first book. And then I do a newsletter. It's literally coming out as we speak right now at SeanSpicer.com. It's completely free So, but I try to give insight and show pictures and, and this is I love talking about this kind of stuff. So you're in my wheelhouse. But if you're equally passionate as Janine and Kathy about politics, like I said, those are two great resources for you. Um, I, so I I think the one thing that's interesting to note is the White House briefing room is 49 seats, 7 rows of 7. And I'll give you 2 quick things on this. Number one, the way the seating is set up is determined by the White House Correspondents Association because in the early 1990s, the Bush 41 press office just got tired of the drama of who sits where and when, and they said, you know what, you guys, the White House Correspondents Association, you guys just internally decide who sits where. I think that's a mistake, but that's a whole nother road to go down. So the way it works is, and I literally did a column on this a couple weeks ago. So if you go to SeanSpicer.com, I have a photo of the briefing room in there and show you all the seats. But basically, the front row are the major wires. So Reuters, AP, ABC, all the big networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, Fox, then the Washington Post, the New York Times, and then you go further back, and you've got some niche kind of like CNBC has a seat. There's a couple of radio outlets and other, and basically the last time it was updated, I think was 22. And then before that, I was part of the update in 17. And there's literally organizations that fall out of favor for, sometimes it's financial, they cease to exist or whatever. And so they'll reshuffle the deck every once in a while. But the front row is largely the ones that I told you about because they've been there the longest, and they have somebody there every day because you can look at it. So, for example, if you're at the podium now looking out, the first seat on the right, I think is Fox, and then it comes in Associated Press, Reuters as on one end, but then the networks, right? But remember, there's multiple correspondents and reporters for each outlet. So, I'll take Fox for an example. Peter Doocy may be sitting at Fox today. Jackie Heinrich could be sitting in that seat tomorrow. So same thing with the Washington Post and the New York Times. Like there are 4 or 5 White House correspondents that work out of there. And so when I would do a briefing, sometimes I'd have one of my assistant press secretaries run down and say, go, hey, tell me who's in there. And then this gets to the second part of your question. When I first started out, they met with us and they talked about the roles and, blah, blah, blah. And they said, okay, just so you know, traditionally the way it works is the briefing starts when you're done, you call on the Associated Press reporter first. And then you go through the first row, second row. And then if you want, you can get to the back of the room. And then when the AP, the Associated Press reporter, decides that the briefing's gone on long enough, they will say, thank you very much. And that signals the end of your briefing. Well, when I had my first press conference, I was like, no, there's a new sheriff in town, not me, Donald Trump. And we wanted to show that we didn't really care and that Donald Trump was kind of in charge, not them. And so I did this, opening where I talked about the president's schedule, what he was doing, blah, 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 blah. And then I said, Daniel Halper, New York Post, way back of the room. And everybody freaked out. And then I started working the room. And then I called on a bunch of reporters from local news that I brought in on the screens via Skype. So I called on a reporter from Rhode Island, where I'd grown up. I called on a reporter from Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio. And the idea to me was to send a very clear signal that all these Washington elite Beltway reporters don't get to decide the news that's read, seen, and heard for the rest of the country every day. So eventually, as the briefing went on, I moved up to the front of the room. I called on them too, but they just weren't going to be first in line. And then about 45 minutes in, Julie Pace, who was the Associated Press reporter at the time, said, Sean, thank you very much, signaling what they thought would be the end of the briefing. And I looked down at her and I said, thank you, Julie. I'm going to go on. I'll tell you when I'm done. And I wanted to send a very clear signal that Trump was in charge. Things weren't going to be the same. The norms and traditions of the past were not things that were going to govern how we did business. And I know it sounds like for 90%, 95, 8% of America, no one caught on to that. No one did. But for the press corps, they did. And that's why I did it. So it's little things like that that I think were important, because again, part of this to me was I don't believe that these elite reporters who think that they get to decide what issues are the only things that people get to read, hear, and see is a smart way for this country to be informed. I took questions about land use, federal land use out west in Montana, that's important to so many people out there. I took issues um, on a variety of issues. Water, which is comes up all the time in the water resources defense word. Anyway, and because there's certain places in the country that not everyone cares about, the latest issue that's, consuming everyone in DC. They have real issues that affect their lives, and I wanted to make sure that the signal was sent loud and clear that these people who'd been overlooked for so long have issues that are equally as important as everybody else.
That's great. I applaud that. That's really, really, really wonderful. Oh, you're just thrilling. This is a lot of fun. Okay, I have to pass. I have to share. So I'm gonna toss. Thank you so much, Sean Spicer.
You
I'll
bet.
come be on your show. We'll have fun. You can ask me whatever you
I
want.
love it. I love it. Every night at 6 o'clock on YouTube.
Oh, great, great. And how do we get your newsletter?
SeanSpicer.com.
Okay,
And
very
just,
good.
yeah, just sign up. And but yeah, and then every night at 6. And by the way, if you're a real political junkie, Mark Halperin, journalist, and then a guy by the name of Dan Turrentine, who worked for Hillary Clinton. He was Jared Polis's chief of staff on Capitol Hill. We do a thing called the morning meeting every morning at 9. Again, all this stuff is free, so it's not like it costs you anything. We do it live, and we take questions just like this, where we talk about what issues are driving the day. So we do it from 9 to 10 every morning on my YouTube channel. And literally, people can ask a question about anything they want, frankly, and we'll give you sort of the insider answer to why something's happening, how it's going to play out, et cetera, et cetera. But those are all fun things. And
Very
if you're a
cool.
political junkie, there you go.
Well, I am, so I'll check in and all that. Okay, thank you. I'm going to toss now. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Alrighty. Hello,
Hi, guys.
here. Thank you for being on. This is just very fascinating. So one of my questions that I had for you is obviously, you've been talking about you were meeting with your predecessors before. What were some of the advice that they gave you?
Oh, good question. Um, so one of the things that Jen Psaki said to me, well, two things that she said that stuck with me. One is, please don't do this job. So as I said at the beginning, I was the acting comms director and press secretary. And again, it's too long to go into why, because I agree with them. But she was like, I hope you don't have to do both of these jobs for very long. She said literally, my advice for you is to hurry this process along, which I agreed with. And then she also said to me, and it's something that I shared with Caroline, which was take a lot of pictures. And I know at the time, I wish I had actually thought about it more, because the pace of that job is such that you have a hard time remembering what happened that morning. And Donald Trump, as you guys, whether you love him or hate him, the guy is a machine, and he's up early, way early, and he stays up way too late for any staffer to keep up with. I used to love when he played golf, because I was like, okay, that's 2 hours and 20 minutes to the dot that I could actually get some work done or catch up. Um, and I say that because I look back now and I'd forget things. And when I wrote my first book, I would literally go back through pictures and go, oh my gosh, that person was in the room. I forgot that, or I remember this. And I've tried to get better about this now. And it's a line between being, as my son says, sometimes he's like, Dad, you look creepy. But for me, when you're in that job and you see the things that you get to see and meet the people that you do, I wish I had taken more pictures. And so that's that. Josh was just very kind and gracious, more than anything, about just, enjoy this. I wish you the best. Again, politically we're very different, but he's a very top-notch professional, and it's a good individual, good human. And then I will tell you, like Mike McCurry, told me to pick one day, because it is a 24/7 job. And I would usually leave my house just after 5 in the morning and get home sometime around 9, 10 at night. And Mike McCurry said to me, make sure you take one day to yourself. And so generally Sundays to me, we'd get up, go to church, and then I would usually just work from home. But that was that. And I'm trying to remember, I mean, I talked to like everyone from George Stephanopoulos to Ari Fleischer and Dana Perino. Everybody had their own little thing. Some of it logistically, Ari's really smart when it comes to the logistics of the job. He's had a lot of time to think about things, and so he gave me some great ideas.
Very interesting. Hi, Sean. This is Jonah.
Hey, Jonah.
I was just curious, if you could describe like the feeling of knowing that you're the communication piece between the leader of the free world and the people itself? Like, what is that feeling like? And does it have bear a lot of weight or yeah?
Yeah, it bears a lot of weight, and it's a great question, Jonah. I mean, um, I don't think anything could have prepared me. Like I said, I talked to everyone. I worked in the Bush White House um, when Kathy's husband was there, at least I think a piece of it. And so I've seen it up close. But Donald Trump brings a level of intensity and scrutiny that no one imagined. I thought I'd be like C-SPAN famous, and it's like people would be like, there you are, and the sergeant at arms of the House or something like that. I had no idea what was going to happen. And, I remember, and when Robert Gibbs was press secretary, in one of the first weeks, he had said something about the relationship, I think, with England, I think it was. And there are certain colloquial terms that you use with countries. So if you ever hear a government official talk about England, we have a special relationship with England. That's meant to denote this. And so if you say things are going really well with the UK, everybody freaks out in the diplomatic world. Like, why? What changed? What's different? And they read things into every word. And a lot of people harped on Gibbs at the time. And then it was my turn in the barrel. And I'm like, okay, when you say certain things that people take one way, sometimes people are offended by something that you said. And you're right. You feel the weight of I'm Catholic. I have so much Catholic guilt, and so I'll be like, somebody would let me know that, hey, someone got really offended by your comment or this, and I'd be like, oh my God, that wasn't my intention. And so it's a very awesome responsibility. It's scary at times, thinking, okay, like I've got to make sure that, and there's also like some national security issues. You get read in on a lot of classified information about what's going on in our government, and you've got to be very careful with how you communicate certain things and how it might be communicated or interpreted or inferred. So, like I said, it is a good question because it's such an awesome responsibility. Knowing that it's not just, the press corps and citizens, but around the world, people are looking to that.
Yeah, I can't even imagine having to be the person who gets up on behind that podium and then having to watch every word that you say and then being worried if you say the wrong words too, because like you said, there's definitely always going to be someone who might be offended by what you say.
Right.
I did want to switch on more towards like the military side. I'm in the ROTC program at my local university. I was just curious how that transition works from going from one commander in chief to the next. Like, when do they start getting filled in on all the information? And if you could give light to that.
You mean from a security issue? And
Yeah, kind of more like how does information get passed along to the incoming president, and when does that information start to get passed along during that first day?
so it's varied during different transitions, but generally speaking, after the president wins, they will start getting. In fact, actually, I take that back. Maybe even just trying to think back to Romney. I think it's once you win, you start getting read in on getting a daily briefing, and during the transition, they'll read you in on on a variety of things. The president's daily briefing, it's called the PBD, is unique though. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that is very sensitive that only the current commander in chief gets read in on, and so I think it varies a little, but the incoming president will get security briefings pretty much after they win.
Okay, interesting. And then probably one last question here.
Yeah.
So what were some of the biggest surprises to you? Some things that you might not have known about or didn't really think about whenever you moved to being the press secretary?
So I think the biggest one is what I mentioned a minute ago. Like I had been a Capitol Hill press secretary. I'd been in the, done military media affairs for 20 years. Um, I'd been the assistant U.S. trade rep traveling around the world doing media on behalf of the executive office of the president. So I thought I knew. And like I said, I talked to all my predecessors. So I was like, okay, I got this. And then just, I'd done the practice in the transition briefings on camera. I was like, okay. And then the level of scrutiny, I don't know that I could have been prepared. I mean, but the stuff like, I had people at my house. We had, threats. We had um, uh, people trying to protest. I got harassed publicly, very epically and publicly in an Apple store once. Another time in a Harris Teeter. And I don't think any of that stuff is things that you anticipate or are prepared for. But I would say that was probably the biggest thing that I didn't anticipate. Um, and and it was one of the most refreshing things about leaving is that, it was just, even the day that I left, Reuters had a live stream of my house up for and there were reporters camped out in front of it. Luckily, my wife had taken our kids on a work trip, ironically, so so they weren't there. Um, but that was probably the one thing that I wasn't prepared for.
Wow. Yeah, that's just, man, I commend you for doing that because that is a big responsibility and not only affects you, but like you were talking about your family too.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much. We're gonna pass it along.
All right, guys. Thanks.
Hello, Sean. This is Joel Gilbert
Hey,
speaking.
Joel.
Been a great show so far. So my first question is based off of we got to hear President Trump talk about his surreal experience in entering the White House. We got to hear him talk about his respect for the architecture, his respect for the history. We got an insight into values in a way with him we don't often get in his explanation of ideology. And my question is, do you think that that type of him viewing that as more surreal than the moment of getting shot is something that's shared among other people who've entered the other of those who will be entering his administration? Or do you think that most of them will already have been maybe politically jaded enough to where they're not going to have that experience? Or do you think it'll be shared among his incoming administration?
Yeah, there's something just awesome about the responsibilities of these jobs and the institution that you work in. And when you walk in the White House, there's this storied history that exists. The rooms, they always say in foreign policy that the Oval Office is the best home court advantage because you can't help but be enthralled with the beauty of it, the majesty of it. And I think that's very accurate. So if you walk into the Capitol, the United States Capitol, or the White House, and you're not in awe, then you need to go. I mean, it's pretty simple. It's just like there's something that you have your priorities backwards, or you're too jaded. That if you don't find the beauty in those institutions, and both in terms of just their history, but also the architecture and the nature of the buildings themselves, then I think you might want to check your priorities.
All right, and I've watched Two Way since the election. It's
Oh,
been
good for you.
yeah, it's very interesting. So what I'll say is that um, it's a good faith discourse and not
Yeah.
necessarily a soundbite debate show.
Well,
Um,
but the idea though, Joel, and this is why we did it, is so Mark and I were both at Newsmax going back a few years, and we would dominate. Every network has a morning meeting. And a lot of the times, obviously, because of the nature of cable news, we talk about politics or whatever. And Mark and I were always two go-to people on the call. When I left the network to go independent, I said to Mark at one point, Mark Halperin had developed what they called the Note back in the day. He's the first one to ever make a morning newsletter. And I said to him, God, it would be so cool if you could actually, if the public could be part of a morning meeting and hear how people discuss these issues that determine like what news is going to happen and the angle and whatever. And so we threw it out there as just a beta test, if you will. Like let's see if people are interested in this. And it is just blown up in the morning because the goal isn't to win you over. This isn't like a cable show where I'm trying to get you to be a supporter of President Trump, or Dan Turrentine isn't trying to get you to be a Democrat. It's that we're trying to explain to the process. Why is X going to be a big story? Why shouldn't it be covered? What angle of it would it be kind of interesting to go down versus where the mainstream media is going? And so the difference is when I go on cable news, I will proudly say I'm a conservative that believes in these issues, and here's what I want people to buy in. The goal in that show isn't for me to win you over. It's to explain to you why are members of Congress doing X, or why is President Trump doing Y, and how come they're not doing it a different way? Like, why is it happening here? Or how come the media is only covering this, not that? So it's fundamentally a unique show because we're not trying to win you over or outdo each other. Dan Turrentine is a great guy. I love being on with him, and we can bounce off each other. I'm not trying to pummel him like it's there used to be a show called Crossfire on CNN, and the idea was to outdo the other person. Like, I'm not trying to beat him with an argument. Sometimes, actually, a lot of times we agree because part of it is the analysis, not the debate itself.
Which is extremely informative for the audience because we almost get a more honest take on some of the ideology that informs the
Right.
that informs your
But
view.
also, I think part of it is the why. Like, there's days when you're like, why is this member of Congress doing this, or this government official? And our goal is to say they're doing it because of these three reasons, not to tell. And we're not trying to, like I said, win you and say, but we're trying to explain why something's happening the way it is, as opposed to win you over. At my show every night at 6 o'clock, I'm very open about what I believe in, what I want to see more of. I mean, like, so it's ideological. I talk a lot about conservative issues, values, what's going on in the government, Republican politics. But in the morning, the goal isn't to do that. It's to explain the process that's happening, how our government operates, why politicians are doing what they're doing, et cetera, et cetera.
Which then takes me to the question about now the White House press secretary and the communications, which does have a priority of as you described, explaining the president, doing your best to explain the president's view and vision. Um, but that being said, how much does that differ from what you are accomplishing, let's say on a two-way, versus a very partisan pundit who is there, as you said, trying to convince someone of something? Is the press? Would you say that the press secretary, the press corps, is somewhere between those two things? Um, how much are they able to try to present the president's ideas in a way to all versus how much are they trying to convince people of the efficacy of these ideas? What is the priority of the press secretary, and who is the audience? Although I know, of course, it's the whole world, but who is the audience?
That's a really good question because it depends. There's certain things that the president does to appease their base of voters or supporters. And there are certain things they are doing to convince more people to support them. And then there's frankly some things that you're doing just to inform people. The job of the press secretary is to inform people what the president's view is on a whole host of issues and why, right? So part of what you're doing is saying President Trump is issuing this order because he believes in X, Y, and Z. He wants America to be safe. I mean, so you're explaining his positions, his thoughts. So, hopefully, part of the reason that he's doing certain things is to fulfill pledges that he made to voters that get the country moving in a better direction. And so it's a little bit of everything that you're asking, but it also depends on like certain issues that are more appeasing or as in that the base core group of supporters wanted or he pledged to them during the election or something like that.
And is that explicit and tactical, or is it something that at the end of the process you just automatically implicit and it falls into this bucket, or is it something that when you're deciding the messaging, you actually will say explicitly, "Hey, this is why we need to do this for this political tactical reason," or what have you?
No, I mean, there's just certain issues that
Yeah.
um, I'm just trying to think of a good, like, closing the border, for example, right? Um, I think that's obviously a big issue with the base, but it's also good for the country. We need a safe and secure country. We need less drugs and crime flowing into the country. So, but is that, that sort of falls somewhere in between. Like you're doing it not just to appease the base, but because you ideologically believe that that's the best way to achieve some kind of goal.
Yes. Okay. I want to pass to some audience questions because I know that they must have so many today. I will say that as far as messaging goes, I was watching the college football national championship last night, and the president spoke during I believe, the halftime. Um, it's certainly it's like a full court press. It feels like this time in the messaging, and it seems um, very almost branded, but in an honest way. So
Yeah.
thank you so much, Mr. Spicer, and I want to pass on to the audience and Kathy.
Well, thank you, Jewel, and thank you, Wyatt and Jonah and Janine. And this has been fascinating so far. And Sean, before we go to audience questions, I want to give a shout out to a few of our teachers and students who are watching today. We have Professor Alex Tokarov on, who's a professor at Northwood University. With students, we have Sharon and Connor Cummings. We have Kathy Cooksey, who's watching with students. We have Hope Mucklow, who's watching with students. So thank you to everyone who's watching with students today. And if you are a teacher, homeschool parent, or teacher watching with students, drop us a note in the Q&A, and we'll be sure and give you a shout out before the end of the program. We also want to thank our listeners in Las Vegas's KKVV 1060 AM. Constituting America's live Constitutional Chats podcast airs on Monday evenings on KKVV 1060 AM in Las Vegas at 6 p.m. Las Vegas time. So thank you to everyone in Las Vegas who's listening. And Sean, first of all, we will go to, let's see, Patrick Jacob and Julianne Smith have both asked about TV characters who portray press secretaries on TV. Patrick says, I like the character of Seth Wright, who plays the press secretary on the TV series Designated Survivor. What movie or TV series do you feel depicts the true working environment of the press secretary in the White House and the chaos that frequently occurs during press briefings? And likewise, Julianne Smith asked, how close are the press briefings on the TV show The West Wing to reality?
Great question. So it's funny because the briefing that you see on television, I would say, is probably traditionally 15 to 20% of the job. The meetings, the decisions, the one-on-one questions and interviews that you do with several members of the media is what takes up the job. I think that the shows like The West Wing highlight the briefing. There's really not anything that fully does that, right? Because the briefing is the most public part. It's the one that everybody knows about. And so they've always played that up on a lot of shows. And I'm trying to think of a couple that, and that's just, I mean, that's what they do. It's sort of like, I'm not a doctor, but I mean, imagine like a doctor looks at ER and says, that's not really how we spend our day, running around going, get me a CBC Chem 7 or stat. It's just so, but I mean, I don't think there's I used to love The West Wing. I just don't think there's an accurate depiction because the job's not that exciting outside of the briefing for most people. I mean, it's literally meeting after meeting after meeting, and having to brief people or get briefed. Because if you're making a decision, you'll say, okay, sometimes it's an agency. Hey, I need all the guys from the Domestic Policy Council and Health and Human Services to come over and walk me through what we're doing on healthcare. I need to get some of the guys from the Department of Defense or the National Security Council to come in and walk me through what this rollout of this military operation is. And so you could spend, an hour just getting briefed on something. And then conversely, you're going into meetings where you're getting asked your input or providing your insight. So that's really not good TV. Janine can tell you.
Well, that's great. Jonathan Nash asked, you listed some elements of the job you didn't expect or that were difficult. What are some elements of the job that you found really enjoyable or that you enjoyed and found rewarding?
I had some really good, solid people that I worked with. I enjoyed getting to meet some of the people internally. I will say the job overall, is really cool. Like there are people and opportunities that you will never get anywhere else. Some of the foreign travel, obviously, that you do with the president is like, you'll never travel like that again. In terms of the access that you get, the way, I mean, there's no like, you're not going to the airport, put it that way. I mean, like a normal airport, you get on Air Force One, someone gets your bag, it's all there. It's not like normal travel. And then just the access that you get to individuals. Both people visiting the White House, the press secretary is in, I'd say 65 to 70% of all meetings in some way, shape, or form. And, there were world leaders, there were people of great significance, and whether it was business. Met a lot of sports figures that obviously come through the White House, winning teams, and so you're kind of like, there's a picture that I put in my book. I'm a New England Patriots fan, and at one point I had pretty much the starting lineup in my office. Gronk sitting there eating chicken tenders at my desk. Um, and there's just moments where you're like, I got to pinch myself. I cannot believe I'm in this room. So those were the things that were really cool, where you're looking at an event going, I cannot believe I'm here.
That's great. Now, Robert Zimmerman asks, Robert says his job sounds likely to be a case of burnout quickly, very intense as his words carry a lot of weight. How do you feel about that?
100% agree. It is a 24/7 job. There's just, like I said, you could get a call in the middle of the night. Hey, this is happening, or because you need to know about everything. Some things, the job of a lot of the policy people is to make sure that they're telling you at all times, everything that's happening. And there are a lot of things that happen that don't see the light of day, but you have to get read in on so that you know that it's happening, so you're not caught off guard, or that you can make the decision or advise the president and say, hey, there's this thing happening. We should get out in front of it, do an interview, do a story, release some information. You can't just walk away at any point. You get, calls, emails 24/7, 7 days a week. There's always something going on. And like I said, there's a lot of stuff that never makes the light of day that you get read in on because you've got to be aware of all the different moving parts of the federal government, the various agencies. And there's a reason that people burn out in the job. You just can't sustain that.
And then Robert Zimmerman asks, will the new press secretary be so open to reporters all over the country like you were during the first Trump administration? And are there any constitutional issues that come up that you have to be careful with?
There are some ethical issues that you have to, like I had to sell, I didn't exactly have like a massive portfolio, but like you have to get rid of all of your stock and holdings and things like that. So there are some like financial constraints, but there's no constitutional issues that, there's silly things. Like I went out with Vice President Pence to the Super Bowl, and I had to buy my own ticket because otherwise it would be seen as a gift because I wasn't performing my duties as press secretary. So there's some those constraints in the job, but there's nothing real constitutional that prevent you. It's kind of the opposite. It's the First Amendment. You're protected. You can go in and say things pretty much, but again, remembering that you are representing the President of the United States.
Thank you. And then Deb Vitas asks about President Biden's final pardons, and she's asking if some of those pardons occurred after President Trump had been sworn in. So would President Biden's pardon power have been moot at that point? Do you
It's a
know?
good question. From what I understand from the timeline, they were issued with a few minutes remaining and weren't made public until afterwards. Now, I don't know anything more than you do and what I read. So, if they were to find out that they weren't executed or they weren't signed, but because his signature's on those forms, there's a job in the White House called the staff secretary, and they're like a conductor in a train hall or a air traffic controller landing planes, and their job is to move the paper to make sure that everything goes, that there's a record of it, that it's handled appropriately according to the Presidential Records Act, that it's everything signed and the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. And so the staff secretary for President Biden would have ensured that that was recorded before 12 o'clock. Now, again, if something comes out that shows that that didn't occur by that timeline, then that's a whole different story. But there's nothing that I'm aware of at this point that I know that it happened after 12.
Well, thank you. And we are right at the top of the hour, and we know you are super busy. We don't want to keep you any longer, although we would love to, because this has been fascinating. And Janine, I want to ask if you have any closing comments real quick.
I'll just say, Sean Spicer, thank you so much. I'm going to go get your book. I'm going to read your daily report, and I'm going to come visit your show. So I'll see more
that's
of
awesome.
you.
Yeah.
Thank
By the way,
you so much.
tonight at 6, we have a really robust discussion on the executive orders we went down yesterday. So if you want to watch, the show kicks off in 3 hours on my YouTube channel, and I love the feedback. I read the chat every day. So if you think we missed something or really like something, you just put it in the chat, and we'll take it up.
Can you watch it later if you can't do it right at 6?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's a good question, Janine. The morning meeting is live, but there's always a version of it, so you can always go back. And then at 6 o'clock, it's called premiering versus live. So it comes out at 6. You could watch it at 2 in the morning if you wanted any of them. But if you want to be
Great.
part of the morning meeting, you do have to be live for us to answer your question live. And then as far as the evening one goes, you just have to subscribe. And if you hit the notification button, it'll send you a little link to it too.
Wonderful. Okay, good deal. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you to our audience, and come back next week. We're going to be talking about buying Greenland and how it would work with the Constitution. So we'll look forward to seeing everybody next week. Thanks.
Thanks, Kathy.
Bye.